All right. This is March something, 2021. And this is in Medina at our home, Craig's home and Lisa's home. And this is Ruth Woodman Knight Hill, my mother. And we're just going to ask her some questions.
And she is 89 years old.
And you are 89 years old. My goodness. Okay. And just had a birthday here a while back.
December.
So, anywho, Mom, where are you from?
Gould, Oklahoma.
And that's where you grew up and spent all your growing up.
Where I was born and grew up and went through school.
And your parents, what were their names?
Lige and Lucille Woodman. Woodman.
And Elijah's name was?
Elijah Ernest.
Elijah Ernest. And he was in the war, in the Great War?
First World War. He was born in September 27th, 1894.
In Texas. Down
Allen, Texas.
Allen, Texas. Okay. And Grandma Lucille, where was she born?
She was born in Hiawatha, Kansas in 1895. November the 23rd, I believe.
And then Granddaddy Lige got to Oklahoma how?
Well, his family came to Oklahoma to homestead on some land. They were living in Texas. And they came up over the Red River and to 2 or 3 different places. Started out at Mangum, Oklahoma, and they decided that wasn't it. But they went back to Texas and when he was 6 months old, so that would have been in 1895.
4 or 5?
5, yeah. And
so they didn't stay long in Mangum, huh?
No, not too long. A while. Some of my grandma's folks already lived up there, Melton's cousin or something. And they went back down to Texas, but then they came back, and when they did, they dropped south of Mangum on the Turkey Creek area.
Over by Duke, between Duke and Gould?
It was over by McQueen, Oklahoma, and that was the town in those days, McQueen. And they lived there a while, and then Granddaddy started looking for land to trade for, because he was a horse trader and he liked to trade everything. So this was east of Gould, about 6 miles, and that wasn't where he wanted. He wanted back over in where the land was flatter and more fertile. So he started, he homesteaded on one place, and then he ended up trading it to somebody else for another place. And then I don't know how he got that land to start it with. Well, he bought the land that Daddy and Mother lived on there in Oklahoma from a cousin of his. Gave him a gold piece and a horse.
He's the one that had racehorses, right?
Yeah.
Granddaddy Woodman?
Yeah, Granddaddy Woodman. This was Granddaddy Woodman. His name was Oscar Woodman. And he was born you know what, I can't remember. He was born in Texas. Grandma was. In Texas, came to Oklahoma.
Wait, was it Oklahoma Territory?
Yeah. And that was the place that my mother and daddy lived on, and built a house and farmed all that. And then he had traded for a lot more land around. And Grandma Woodman lived just a half a mile up on a little rise, little higher place. And that's where he and Grandma Woodman lived, just to the north of us. And they lived there until till he passed away, and she moved to Gould later years during the war, during the Second World War. My daddy was in the First World War in the early 1900s. And after that, he came back and went to college at Oklahoma State, Stillwater, and that's where he met Mother, I think. And they later married, and she was going to school there too, but to be a home economics teacher, and she'd already been a teacher, but she wanted to be a home ec teacher. And then they lived in Weatherford, Oklahoma, and he worked for the college in Weatherford. And I don't know for how long. J. Walter and Charles Russell, they had J. Walter when they lived there. And Charles Russell was born up at Enid, Carrier, Oklahoma.
What did Granddaddy Elijah do at that college?
He was the
Secretary.
what was he? The registrar. He was the registrar. He took care of all the students registering and the registration and whatever they do for that.
Gotcha.
That's what he was, the registrar. And he was, the president of the college was an old-time friend of theirs. And in fact, he married them. He was a preacher, plus he was a teacher, and I don't know what else. But anyway, his name was J. Walter Turner, and he was at the college at what is called Southwestern Oklahoma College now.
In Weatherford.
At Weatherford. And from there they moved to Gould and started farming. And in 1931, they moved there in 28. And his father passed away. He had cancer. And my mother and dad lived with Grandma and Granddaddy for a while till they could build a house. And then they built a house, and then I was born in 1931, during the Dust Bowl days. And we did have had a doctor in those days. So he took care of Mother and all whenever she had, all three of us younger ones were born out there at the farmhouse. And this Dr. Allgood, who has sons that are doctors in Lawton now, but he was a doctor there, and he delivered us, all three of us, at different times. And we all lived out there on the farm. We was all born in the back southeast bedroom. So we hated to lose that house or to go to Gould.
I bet.
And we were there till we all grew up there and went to school at Gould. And my two older brothers were a bit older than us, quite a bit, and they were both in the Navy during the Second World War out in the Pacific. So they were. Charles graduated in 1941, and J. Walter quit school and got Daddy and Mother to sign for him so he could go in the Navy at an early 18 or 17 years old. And then, but they were a lot older than Jean and Jimmy and myself. And we had we had kinfolks all around. There was uncle and aunt and some cousins lived just a quarter of a mile up the road. And my grandma lived up another direction by herself after her husband passed. And she lived there during the wartime. And then Daddy found her house in Gould and moved her over there. And his sister lived with her at that time. my uncle and aunt lived with her son up on the farm there. She
Aunt
had
Cora?
horses,
Aunt Cora?
Aunt Cora, and my Uncle John and Aunt Mabel lived with her some there on the farm. And my grandma had polio when she was young, and she was kind of crippled, and one foot was crippled. And she rode horses side saddle, and she always had horses. They all had the horses straight. My granddaddy liked race horses, and my uncle and them had race horses. And in fact, my granddaddy left me. He never did see me because he'd passed before I was born. And he wanted me to have a horse when mother had a girl. Well, when I was born, I was the owner of a horse.
A racehorse.
Yeah, and
I didn't know that.
and then Daddy decided I didn't need a horse, so he sold it and got me a cow. So I had a cow, and later years sold it.
Well, that's not near as much fun as a horse, but
Well, I
guess
never
that's
did
okay.
ride it.
Did
Grandma,
the cow have a name?
huh?
Did your cow have a name?
No,
No.
I never
Cow.
did. I don't recall it. See, because Daddy kind of just took it over, and I didn't know. Well, we just had lots of cows. So anyway, let's see. My grandma Woodman, she rode this horse side saddle, and it was really something because she could really ride. And my daddy had, in Daddy's family, there was 4 boys and 1 girl, like Mother and Daddy's family. And he lost a brother, got killed by a horse dragging him when he was just 12 years old. And they lived right there.
Oh, tell that story.
They were taking the horses over, had races over to Childress. And my granddaddy and my 2 uncles and Daddy took horses over there for that race. And this brother of Daddy's was young, and Grandma didn't want him going because he was too young. And she knew that he'd be putting him on a horse. And he did, Granddaddy Woodman did, and the saddle slipped or something, and he fell off, and he got drugged to death. And it just about killed my grandma. She never did get over it.
And they went down there in a wagon.
I don't know.
Probably would have had to. That was early, wasn't it? Was he younger or older than your dad?
He's the youngest child.
Okay.
Daddy was the next to the oldest.
Wow.
He was only 12 years old, and they were all grown.
I bet Grandma Woodman was upset with him.
She never forgave him, her husband,
Her baby.
because she begged him not to do that. And it's like men, they didn't pay no attention. And anyway, they came back there, and Mother and Daddy still lived down there on the farm. And it just got, my brothers were in the Navy during the war, and Daddy just didn't have any help hardly. And I was only 12 years old, about that, 11 or 12. And I had to help him where I could at the farm, like drive the pickup or the car, and go to town and get stuff, or take something to the elevator or whatever. And just everybody had to help out in the 40s. And there just wasn't, he had one guy he could hire that could fairly help. But it really was more than Dad could take care of. And there was a lot of drinking and all went on in the Woodman family, and hardships and all that kind of stuff. And Daddy, just didn't have any help. My mother didn't drive, and there was always so much work for her because she had to feed all the harvest hands, and they fed everybody then. When they worked out there, or they slept out in the yard or slept in the garage or whatever, then she fed them. And she fed everybody. A lot of times she'd have 30 thrasher men to feed. and she'd fix the meat and whatever. If she had to kill chickens or whatever, she'd go right out there in the yard and gather up some chickens and wring their heads off and
Wow.
dress them. That's something.
I can't see Grandma still doing that.
Oh, she did. And then in 1952, let's see. Well, Jimmy and Jean went to, they were real close in age, and they went to college when they got out of high school, but they helped on harvest for other people. Combine, they'd go combining way up north, and then they got ready to go to college, and they'd go to Lawton to college. And then when they left, well, Dad sure didn't have much help. And because they'd gotten where they could help him some.
That'd be in the 50s, in the 1950s.
Yeah, I graduated from school in 1950, and Jean did in 52, and Jimmy in 53. And they both went to Lawton, to Cameron College, to 2 years. It was a 2-year school. And then they went to Oklahoma State up at Stillwater, and they both got agronomy degrees, and both worked in that field. And my dad was he had all kinds of animals. He raised pigs and cows, lots of cows, and we had turkeys. He sold them commercially, and with chickens, but lots of hogs. He had a big pen down in the pasture that he raised lots of hogs, and it was just lots of work.
Did you have to help feed them?
Huh?
Did you have to
No,
help
I
feed
didn't.
them?
No, the boys, Jimmy and Jean, did that. And Jim and Jean did some show hogs too for the school.
Mm.
We have pictures of that. And Jay Walter later married, and then he lived in Hollis for a while, and then they went to Oklahoma City when I married and went over there to live, to work. And Charles Russell lived right there at home all the time, right across the street from Mother and Daddy, and out on a farm close to where they lived, and then moved into town, built a house. And but our grandmother passed away the year I got married in 1952. Grandma Woodman did. And Aunt Cora lived till 1968, I believe, something like that. And she lived there in Grandma's house. And then I had some cousins right up the road. They lived close to Mother and Daddy. And it was a good life. I went to after I came back, I worked in Enid and lived with my grandma Dyke for a while. And then I for a year and a half, and then I came back and worked at the courthouse in Hollis, Oklahoma. And then in 1952, I married Charlie Knight from up at Reed, Oklahoma, Mangum area. And then we moved to Oklahoma City.
Tell me how you met Dad.
My friend, she stayed with me up in Enid for a while to work, and we graduated together, and we're friends. And her brother-in-law worked at this company in Hollis, a gas company, and he kept telling Almadine that he had this guy that needed to meet me, and so finally, I said, okay, I'll meet him, and so he came to a hamburger shop there in Hollis, and he didn't do anything except speak to me and come in and got him something to eat, and it was a hamburger malt shop. And then he came up to where I worked at the courthouse, and then I went with him, and then we got married in 52 and moved to Oklahoma City, and that was his mother and daddy lived up there by Reed, out on the farm, and that's the boy, my son's father, Charlie Knight, and he was raised up there at Reed, and that's where his dad and mother lived.
Where did you get married?
Got married at Gould in the preacher's house, the Methodist preacher at Gould, Smith. He stammered and stuttered, but he got it done.
A stuttering preacher.
He was an old guy.
And where did you go on your
He was a-
honeymoon?
J-Mo. He was an old Methodist preacher there, but the church changed preachers every 2 years, and he just so happened to be the one there then. And then from there we went to Oklahoma City and lived for a few years, 5 or 6 years, and then he went in the Army again, and we lived in. He was in Arkansas for a while for training. Then we went to Virginia, and I quit working in Oklahoma City and went with him to Virginia. And after that, he moved down to Fort Hood, Oklahoma, Fort Hood, Texas, Killeen. But he was on maneuvers for quite a while, so I stayed at home at Gould with Mother and Daddy. And then old Craig was born in 1956 in Killeen, Texas. And then Charlie got out of the Army, and we went back up to Oklahoma, and he decided he didn't want to go to Oklahoma City again. We had jobs up there, but he didn't want to. And so we went to Dumas, Texas.
Tell us about the story on how Craig was born in Killeen instead of.
Oh yeah, I was expecting Craig. He was in the Army down there, and I didn't want to go to an Army hospital, and so. But we had saved some money, from when we sold our house in Oklahoma City to leave, and so we went to this private hospital. But I didn't go there right at first because I would go out to the Army base and get my vitamins and stuff, and Craig. Charlie decided I should go up to Oklahoma to have Craig with this doctor that had delivered all of us. So I got up there, I caught a train and went up there, and I had to get off in Quanah. And Daddy and Mother met me at Quanah, and I stayed up there and went to see this doctor and all at Altus. And then I decided, I got to thinking it. No, it's Charlie's place to be there when we have the baby. And so I just got back on a bus and went to Oklahoma City to the Union Station and caught a train and went down to Temple. And Charlie met me there, and then it was just 2 weeks, then Craig was born.
So you were very pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah, the bus driver didn't. I knew him. He was from Gould. He didn't much want me to go. He delivered me out there to that Union Station in Oklahoma City to catch that train.
I was glad he didn't deliver me.
Yeah. Anyway, 2 weeks. And you were a little bit late, was lucky. But I don't know. Charlie just chickened out. That's pretty
That was
bad.
back in the good old days. Send them home to Mama.
Yeah, but after I got down there and I thought, no, I don't need to do this. They didn't have a house, a bathroom, or running water, or.
Yeah.
And two, he needed to have been there.
But for the grace of God, I would have been an Okie. Thank you, Mother. Thank you. I love you.
He's a Texan. It's always John. John was born in Dumas, Texas, in 1959. And they both grew up there and went to school there and graduated, and then went to college at Texas Tech in Lubbock. We had a good life in Dumas. It's a very good place for kids, and for advantages for kids to have a job and to do things and not be lazy laying around like they do now.
You talk about the way we lay around, or
No, the way kids do.
Oh, okay.
They don't know how to do anything. Believe me, you ought to see. Anyway, we just have met a lot of friends, made a lot of friends in Dumas, always been involved in church, and had a lot of good church friends, good friends we work with, and I worked for the Department of Public Safety for 20-some years, and helped me to make a living. Charlie passed away in 1981. That's 19, yeah. 1981. And then I lived by myself in Dumas and worked until I could retire. And my kids lived in Houston and Dallas and Midland, and Craig lived in Chicago once, and now they're both down here by San Antonio and Houston. So that's what I'm here with them right now. And with this terrible virus thing that went around and hurt a lot of people, they brought me down here thinking it was a lot safer than where I lived. And I live in Dumas now, but and I will go home this next week. But Craig and Lisa looked after me and kept me going, and we all got the vaccinations, and hopefully that this thing will subside with all of the medical technology.
Well, tell us about your new best friend.
Oh yeah, I've got good friends here at Craig's. 2 little black cats, and they are the cutest and sweetest things. They are very sweet, and they've got 3 dogs and 3 cats, really, outside cats. These are inside cats, and they're jet black, and they're just the sweetest things. And yes, you are. Yeah, come here. And anyway, Craig and Lisa have a real nice home and involved in church and involved in the neighborhood, and Craig and Lisa adopted a little girl back when she was 12 years old, and from Russia, and she lives here, and she's gone to college and just works for a veterinarian and loves it. And then his other daughter is Allison, and she's a registered nurse up in Seattle, Washington, and I see her quite often and talk to her quite a bit. And
She loves her mama.
and I have 2 other granddaughters. John has 2 girls, and when those 3 girls were young, I used to come get them and take care of them and keep them at my house after I'd retired. And they're awful sweet girls, and they're just have been a big part of it all. And Micah works in the hospital and is a respiratory therapist, and she lives over at Austin, Leander, in Austin suburb. And then Allison lives in Seattle. And Gally lives in Medina, Texas.
And
Jeanette lives in Belle Chase, Louisiana. And she's works for Phillips Petroleum. She's engineering. But they're all sweet kids, precious kids. And John and Diana live over halfway between Houston and San Antonio, just right there, out on a ranch also. All of them live out in the country. And got 4 great-grandkids, 3 girls and 1 boy.
Well, tell me about when you were real young, about what it was like in the Depression, when your brothers were off at war, and what it was like.
Well, our grandma and granddaddy lived way up north in Oklahoma, and during the war and when it was really tough, before the Depression, before the war, you hardly had tires or a lot of foods, and gasoline was rationed, and tires. And we went to see our grandparents up there in North Oklahoma every Christmas, and once during the summer. and we might just have a flat after flat, and just find an old tire along the way and use it for a while, and it was just real hard. And but we always managed to go see the grandparents, and we'd stay there, and then we'd go in the summer once, and still could catch a train occasionally. That way, we did that, went to see grandparents. But it was hard. It was very hard during those little times. There was just, now Daddy was able to get more sugar and more tires and things like that. I don't know whether it was because of the land he farmed or what, but a lot of it was used stuff, you know, things that had been used that people had just thrown aside. And it was really difficult. During the in the 30s, we had out in the farming area, we finally did get butane, but that was after the end of the ending of the Depression, but just before the war started. And then right after that, we got electricity out there in the country. So that really helped us through those years of hard times during the war. We did have electricity, and we had the butane. I don't remember what year that we got that, probably in 39, and the electricity came first. And but that was all made, it was really very difficult back in, and we didn't have good water out there. We had wonderful land and good land, and we lived on the creeks, but you couldn't use the water, and it was gyp sinks everywhere out in that country, in our pastures, but not in the good farming land. And so therefore we had a well, but you could put it in an air conditioner, but you couldn't use it for anything. Gyp is just very hard. And we didn't have a bathroom. We had the WPA built a big, good outhouse. And that was back in the 30s that they built that, but that's what we had until they moved the house to Gould in 1960. And then they had water and gas and sewerage and everything there. And that was just 2 miles into town. And but they enjoyed that a lot.
Did you like school when you were little?
Yeah. I missed a month when I was first grade because I had scarlet fever, and we caught it we all went, during the fall, we'd all go to the, what was that called?
Stock show?
No, the carnival. The carnival came to town because they knew we had a little bit of money during the pulling cotton. And so we would go to the carnival, and Mother and them just knew that that's where I got the scarlet fever. But nobody else had it, just me. And I was really sick for over a month. And so that's all that. But I liked school, and I liked my teachers, and
How about first grade though? When you first started school, did you like it?
Oh no, I didn't want to leave home. Well, our first grade, our teacher, everybody had Miss Jessie, and she didn't have any kids. She'd never been married, and she was so good to the kids, you know, and she tried to help them all, and she was so good. We had lots of kids in the room. And then in those days, the restrooms were outside at school, and the water, I can't remember where it came from, but the Gould always had fairly good water, and but they heated the buildings with old coal stoves, and that's what we heated with till we got the butane on the farm, was coal and a little bit of kindling, but more coal. And we had to draw all the water we used out of a cistern we called rainwater. And we had a cistern, and finally then Daddy built a porch around it and closed it in for like a sun porch. That was later years. Well, I wasn't too old, but anyway, he did that, and we had the cistern was there in that porch, but the water ran into it from outside. And then when they moved to town, they had good water. But by that time, they had piped water all over the country and down there in that part of Oklahoma, so everybody had water.
I remember you telling me about that you hated the school so bad the first year that you'd hide under the bridge.
Oh, well, that was my mama decided to send me to the country school down there, and I could start, since my birthday was December, I could start earlier. I could start when I was 6 in December. Well, Gould was a big town school, and it wouldn't let us go to school till you were 6 years old by September, just kind of like Texas is doing. And so Mother decided, since I had this good friend just up the road, that he wanted me to be in the same class she was. So she's going to send me to school down here at this country school so that I could advance that year. And so we had to go walk to the corner, which was a quarter of a mile, and catch a school bus to go to this other school, which was a country school. And I didn't like it at all. And the teacher she didn't have any kids, and but she was married, and she was so, I thought, mean to the kids. But anyway, I couldn't write. I was pretty young, and I didn't have kindergarten stuff, all that then, nothing. And so she would put bibs on us, make us stand up in front of the class and say what we couldn't do. Like I couldn't make a little E, printing. I would try to turn it around backwards. So anyway, she just put a bib around my neck and put me up on the stage and kind of made fun of us, and there were several other kids up there. And so it was so bad, I hated it so bad, and I didn't know anybody down there because this was south of us, and we lived pretty close to town. We lived 2 miles from town, and so anyway, I had to catch that bus every day and had a real nice bus driver. But I just decided there was a bridge there, and I could just hide under that bridge and let that bus go on. And Daddy, if he had to take me, he would just let me stay home. But I was wrong, because I'd missed the bus, and then Daddy had to take me down there. And so one time he just talked to the superintendent, who's the superintendent's wife was my first grade teacher. And she was an old bear, and so anyway, finally, Daddy said, well, that's ridiculous. We're not going to send her down there anymore. I'm not going to take her down there. And my daddy, I just went under that bridge and waited till that bus went on by. And say, oh, Dad, I've missed the bus.
I bet you were happy.
Yeah, and then so Dad finally decided that was all of that.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I started at Gould the next year, and everything worked great. All the kids, so many of them I missed that I went to school with, that we went all the way through school and graduated together. And in fact, I married Charles Hill, who I went to school with. He started there in the 2nd grade at Gould and finished when we did. And in my later years, after my husband passed away 16 years before, then I married him, Charles, and he passed away 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And but a lot of my friends, I still have about 3 or 4 friends that are still living. One of them's the same age I am, one of them's a little bit older, and one of them is a little bit younger. And other than that, we've lost all the old people that we graduated with. They're all gone. And just aren't any old ones around.
But Granddaddy Lige, did he like to play cards? Is that he was an accomplished gambler?
Oh, yeah. Well, he liked to play poker.
Yeah.
But he played with people for money.
Yeah.
But a lot of men did then. But Daddy was a good player,
Yeah.
And but he loved dominoes. He liked to go to the domino parlor at Hollis a lot.
Yeah.
In later years. But Daddy was He just knew how to play them cards and dominoes, and he was a winner. And he's quite a guy. He'd been all over, hopped on freight trains, went to Illinois and worked in a munitions place. He just did everything, and he always had a nice car as he got older. And he could work a lot of things, different than his brothers were.
That's the one. That's Roy was one of them, and John, his brothers.
Yeah, John and Roy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my dad and mother lived in Gould. Daddy lived there about 15 years before he passed away, and he really enjoyed living in town. I'm sure he did. It's all those conveniences that they didn't have at the farm. But he loved being at the farm too, and he always came in and cleaned up and changed his clothes. And he didn't sit around dirty or nothing. He'd wear a clean dress shirt and just to sit in the house. And then when they lived in Gould, he'd come in, take a shower, and get a white shirt on or a nice shirt and all dressed up. He might go downtown and see about the mail or
Play dominoes.
had to go to Hollis to do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a good area, good town to live in.
Oh, tell the story about the red feather mystery.
Oh, when I was a kid in about 1938, I think, and I'm not positive, I think it was in 38, my aunt lived right at the top of the hill, about less than a quarter of a mile. And this is the one that her husband was my daddy's brother. Not older, I don't think, I don't remember. But anyway, he had a bad drinking problem always. And we played out in the road a lot because we had bridges and creeks and everything to play. And Jimmy and Gene and I were all so close together that we played a lot and played out inside. And so this aunt, she's always had milk, cream, or eggs to sell or something like that. And her brother-in-law would come to get eggs. And this one brother-in-law. And so anyway, we were all playing out in the road, and we kept hearing all this hollering and screaming and carrying on, and then shots. And her brother didn't like this brother-in-law, and he came up and he decided to just kill him, shoot him. So he did, and all three of us was out in the road and up there by that bridge, and it wasn't very far, 200 yards up to the house.
How old were you?
I imagine that I was in 38, probably, whatever that is.
6, 7 years old?
About 7 years old. I was old enough that when I stood on the running board to look in, I could, but Jimmy and Jean were too little. Mm-hmm. They couldn't see. And so we all three ran up there as kids, and then Mother and Daddy heard it all, and they went out to the road and met the guy that did the shooting, and then they came on up there. But we'd already run up there and got up on the running board and saw the guy that he'd shot. And that was the brother-in-law, but it was my aunt's brother that shot him and killed him. And then he went on to Hollis to turn himself in to the sheriff. But it was quite a mess. Real sad thing. But anyway, us kids saw a lot of things in those days. Everything was pretty wild.
Yeah.
Not much law on anything. They had about the best sheriff, I guess, around, but it was a mess. Anyway, what else, Craig?
Let's stop it.
And they did convict him of they convicted him of murder, and he lived his time out in the McAllister Penitentiary over in eastern Oklahoma, and he died in the penitentiary.
Hope he thought it was worth it.